Hello, everybody. We continue reading A Swim in the Pond in the Rain, and we are focused on the second short story of this book, The Singers by Ivan Turgenev. We have thus far finished the story completely, and here we are listening and reading to the author, George Saunders, his take on why this second short story is so powerful in his eyes. We've passed through the moments of hearing the descriptions. We've passed through the moments of understanding a little bit more about the reasoning behind the structure of the piece. And now we continue to hear more from the author. So, of Turgenev, Henry James wrote, "The germ of a story with him, Turgenev, was never an affair of plot. That was the last thing he thought of. It was the representation of certain persons. The first form in which a tale appeared to him was as the figure of an individual, or a combination of individuals. They stood before him definite, vivid, and he wished to know and to show as much as possible of their nature. The first thing was to make clear to himself what he did know, to begin with, and to this end, he wrote out a sort of biography of each of his characters, and everything that they had done and that had happened with them up to the opening of the story. He had their dossier, or dossier, as the French say, with this material in hand, and he was able to proceed. The story lay all in the question, what shall I make them do? But, as he said, the defect of his manner and the reproach that was made him was his want of architecture, in other words, of composition. If one reads Turgenev's stories with the knowledge that they were composed, or rather that they came into being in this way, one can trace the process in every line. Nabokov put it more grouchily. Turgenev's literary genius falls short on the score of literary imagination, that is, of naturally discovering ways of telling the story, which would equal the originality of his descriptive art. Our current aesthetic understanding says that physical description should come at speed, naturally, presented organically within the action. Contemporary us, we believe in showing, not telling. We have a low tolerance for the long-winded, endlessly explaining narrator. As one of my students once put it, in Turgenev, action and description seem to take turns stepping up to the microphone, one falling silent while the other speaks. The effect is static, awkward, occasionally madding. A character's backstory comes in the form of a sort of data dump, while the other characters all stand frozen in place like animatrons in a diorama called Russian County Tavern, circa 1850. And so, let's face it, at times the story is rough going. We resist Turgenev's habit of forcing everyone to stop moving and talking so that he can go around collecting data on their brows and hairlines and jackets and so on. The awkward quality of the stagecraft gets almost comical in places. My students always call out one line in particular, as the singing is supposedly about to begin, for special derision. That line is, Suddenly, the wild gentleman half closed his eyes. My neighbor, the little peasant in the torn coat, also craned his neck inquisitively. Banker thrust his hand into the cap and drew out the contractor's half kopeck. There was a general sigh. Yashka flushed, and the contractor passed his hair through the air. Like, why did we add that? No idea. But then we get this. Before proceeding with the description of the contest itself, it may be as well to say a few words about each of the characters of my story. But we feel, Ivan, come on, haven't you already been doing that for like 8 of the preceding pages? Let's say a friend shows up at your house with a bulky, crazy-looking item of clothing, a diving suit made of asbestos, for example, and asks you to put it on. You do so, but it's uncomfortable, itchy, hot. The minutes began to tick by. At some point, you're going to be asking, wait, what's this for? So let's ask that now. What are these laborious character descriptions for? Once we know, we might be more willing to put on the itchy clothes contraption that is Turgenev's character descriptive method. Or less. But first, honoring and channeling the spirit of Turgenev digression, let's take a step back and ask, why do we even need descriptions of characters in the first place? What purpose do character descriptions serve? And for that matter, why do we need characters? And so as we think about storytelling, this is a key point. So back to George. Well, we need characters, to paraphrase David Mamet on actors, so that they can fulfill the purpose required of them by the story. Why do we need Jacob Marley in A Christmas Carol? To convince Scrooge that he is doomed if he doesn't change. What then do we need to know about Marley? Whatever will help him fulfill that purpose, the purpose of convincing Scrooge that he is doomed. What gives Marley authority is the fact that he and Scrooge are business partners, and that if Scrooge ever had a trusted friend, Marley was it. Marley lived exactly the same life that Scrooge is living and committed the same sins. We need to know this, and not much more, so that when Marley tells Scrooge that he better change his ways, Scrooge believes it, and we do too. We do not need to know if Marley was married, or what his childhood was like, or the size of his nose, or how he first met Scrooge. So, do the various side characters in The Singers, Booby, Blinker, Nikolai and his wife, the Wild Gentleman, do anything to make the heart of the story, the singing contest, more potent? Well, yes, we might argue, they function as a panel of judges. So go back to the contractor's performance and read it again, tracking the reactions of the side characters. The heart of the story is a singing performance that we can't actually hear. The side characters tell us what to think about it. We watch them to see how the contractor and Yashka are doing. We value their assessments differently according to what we've been told about them. Booby, for example, we know him as a negligible person, a local drunk whose judgment is not to be trusted. Quote unquote, he had never been known to utter an intelligent, let alone sensible word. He just babbled and talked a lot of nonsense. A regular booby. So he serves as a sort of idiot judge, a personification of undiscriminating judgment, mob mentality, the first to react strongly but usually incorrectly. When he pronounces the contractor the winner, it serves as a broad indicator that the contractor has sung well, but it comes too early, and this verdict is then subtly suspended/overturned by Nikolai, the innkeeper, an excellent judge of what a true Russian considers to be either interesting or important. Or consider the Wild Gentleman. He's been portrayed via that long description just before the contract begins as having enormous influence in all the district. He's passionately fond of singing. Not only that, tremendous forces were suddenly within him. When we look to this Hercules, who was obeyed instantly and eagerly by everyone for help in interpreting the contractor's performance, he first smiles at a certain transition, and then during the end of the song, his gaze softens a little, though his lips kept their contemptuous expression. But he doesn't pass any final judgment. He only orders Yashka to stop stalling and sing as God tells you. Now, let's look at Yashka's performance in this light. Moved by Yashka singing, Nikolai's wife, that hardened case, earlier described as a brisk, sharp-nosed, and quick-eyed tradeswoman, read, no pushover, starts crying. Nikolai looks down, possibly hiding tears. Blinker turns away, ditto. Booby is stunned into an uncharacteristic silence. The little peasant, who showed his enthusiasm for the contractor by spitting with conviction, now whimpers, which we read as a more intense reaction, and we find ourselves looking up the judgment chain of command for some authoritative verdict, who, per the story, has been situated to serve as the ultimate arbiter. The Wild Gentleman, who did not pass definitive judgment after the contractor's performance, now weighs in a heavy tear, and then the word Yashka finalize it. Yashka has won. We can't go to the opera, but we send 4 friends to ask them to text us during the performance to let us know how things are going. As long as they don't all have identical tastes, their texts are going to represent a multi-sourced real-time review of the opera. To the extent that we know them well, we can weigh their responses accordingly. So, our defense continues. Turgenev has made a panel of judges with different personalities and degrees of susceptibility and authority, which allows him to provide a precise picture of the 2 performances as they unfold in real time, via a precise hierarchy of response. That is why these side characters must be described, so that when they react, we'll know what those reactions mean, which to credit and which to discount. Through them, Turgenev creates a sort of ascending ladder of credibility. But still, we may find ourselves asking, even imploring, do the descriptions have to be so long? Do we need all those words to do the job? Say Blinker is going to function as a slightly wacky Les Foyle to Booby. Do we need to know so much about his life story? We already know he's a goofball from the scene when he enters the pub. Do we need to know about his one-sleeve coat, his pointed hat, the shape of his lips and nose? Do these details help tell us what sort of judge we should take him for? There's so much information given that we struggle to know what to retain as relevant. Might there be more efficient, less description-heavy, less taxing versions of the story that would work in the same spirit and more briskly? I always offer my students this optional assignment. Photocopy the story and go through it with a red pen, cutting it down to what feels like a more contemporary pace. Give it a faster clip while trying to preserve the good things about it. Retype it if you're feeling ambitious. Read it fresh. Is it still working better? Can we trim it by 20% more, then another 10%? When do you start to feel that you're cutting into the bone, divesting the story of some of the mysterious beauty that, in spite of its wordiness, is there in the original? If you try this exercise, I think you'll see that it's all about touch, your phrase-to-phrase judgment of what's wheat and what's chaff. Since this type of extreme trimming is sometimes a serious writer is going to need to do to learn to do this on his or her own stories, there's an argument to be made for trying to get the hang of it on someone else's work, especially if they've been dead a while and can't complain about it. If you can't bear to cut Turgenev, try the exercise provided in Appendix A, in which I'll ask/allow you to severely cut into something I've written for that purpose. We've got just a few more pages left of this commentary. Actually, make that 20 more pages left of the commentary. And so we'll continue seeing what more about this short story. And so thanks for y'all for following along, and this is Philip Chen, and we are magical. Take care. Bye.